I was asked to sub by a former teacher of mine for a job that she had, and I showed up with my modern bass and my steel strings, and everybody else, literally everybody else in that orchestra was playing on a period instrument. They were playing Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, and we don't come in for a little while. We sit there and wait, and within the first 4 bars, I almost fell on the floor, and by the time we got to the break in the first rehearsal, I was begging my stand partner to tell me what could I do? How could I do this all the time?
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and so glad to be joined here today by Heather Miller Lardin. And Heather has built a fascinating career for herself, combining performance on historical and modern double basses, as well as Viola da Gamba. She's the founder and director of Night Music, and she also directs the Temple University Early Music Ensemble. Now, we dig into those topics and much more, like Heather becoming Suzuki certified, the Viola da Gamba Society and their concert grant, which she's used to teach little kids gamba. What studying at Curtis was like when she was studying with Roger Scott. She was one of Roger's last students, and how she discovered the concept of performance practice, which led to this aha moment performing Beethoven's Sixth. We also talk about what a career in early music looks like and much more. And we also mention our mutual friend, Philip Cerna, who also performs on violone and viola da Gamba. He was our second guest ever on the podcast way back in 2007. Now, before we get rolling here, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, D'Addario Strings, and let you know about our giveaway for 10 sets of Kaplan strings. You can enter that at contrabassconversations.com/strings. And Kaplans have versatility and control throughout the dynamic spectrum, throughout all registers. They've got a rich tonal color palette. They're great under the bow. They're great as pizzicato strings. They're beautifully balanced. And like all D'Addario strings, they're designed, engineered, and crafted in their New York facilities. I'd also like to give a shout out to the Violin Shop, which offers professional setups, repairs, and restorations at reasonable prices. And they go beyond their customers' expectations with meticulously set up basses, friendly and helpful staff, and highly skilled luthiers. And they all have one common goal in mind, which is making their customers happy with whatever bass they happen to play. So whether it's an open seam or a top-off restoration, the Violin Shop is there to help you through the process. Check them out at bassviolinshop.com. And thank you to Rosin Saver, which is a revolutionary storage device that keeps bass rosin feeling as fresh as the day it was made. It's used by members of top professional orchestras like the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, Cleveland Orchestra, and so many others. And if you go to rosinsaver.com and enter the promo code HEATH, you can get 10% off any and all orders. Okay, here we go with our interview featuring Heather Miller Lardin. I know you teach a lot. Are you Suzuki certified? I was just reading through your bio and I saw Suzuki popping up. Is that a part of what you do?
Yeah, I have done training in books 1 and 2 with Virginia Dixon. I actually, most of the time, don't teach from the Suzuki method. I teach from the Vance method because I don't know if you know anything about the history of how the Suzuki bass was put together. I couldn't even explain it, but I think the whole principle is the same. That I know you've had other people talk to you about that, where you're really reinforcing the mother tongue and having people learn by rote and from memory and getting the technique down. And so I find the Vance books work better for me and for my students. The way I got into teaching a long time ago, I used to go up to New Jersey where Bob Peterson had a lot of students that he started in his elementary school program. And he only liked to take them to a certain point. He would pass them on to another teacher and then start new beginners. And I got these amazing kids with just beautifully set up bow arms. And I said, how is this happening? What are they learning? And I was really fascinated with it. And I never could get down to one of George Vance's camps at the time. But then, because I was getting into early music, which is another story. But then after my kids were born, someone in Ithaca, there's a lot where I was living. There's a wonderful Suzuki school, and someone suggested to me that I might be interested in it, and I thought, yes, I would be. And then I pursued the training in Suzuki because George was dead by that time. I couldn't go to him.
Yeah, it's interesting. Did that, because you'd been teaching before you got Suzuki trained, right? You already had private students. Sure. Did that change the way you teach, like in general at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because before I didn't understand the principles. The way the books look, the Suzuki books and the Vance books, there's a lot of information that isn't in those books. They look very simple and you can go through them. I've had a lot of students come to me and say, oh, yes, I did Suzuki. And they didn't do it in the way that it was intended to be done, and they didn't get the full benefit of it. But I think with bass, it's a big problem that we all encounter, that you often get older students. And sometimes they've been in school and they haven't had private lessons, and you have to get them started somehow. It's the same old story. And you do need to move them through quickly. So I've been looking for solutions to deal with that particular issue.
That sounds like the week I've had teaching this week. You know, it's like, you need to do shortening bread, but you're 17. And so, like, what do you do? Do you start them at the beginning and like, go through, or do you just like, that's like something that's like the perennial struggle for me, because I love using those George Vance books. I find it so useful. And I'm getting better, I think, at like actually going through that sequence with people, but it's hard for me when they come in and they've been playing, you know, since 4th grade, and now they're in 10th grade or something. It's a familiar scenario. And they're just like trying to figure out how to tackle that. Like, do you whip out book 1 of the Vance series and just go through that with them? Or like, what have you done?
I try to do that, but I try to address it from whatever strengths they already have.
Yeah.
So I look at those, and then I have this other book that I use that do you know the Barry Green popular bass method?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. I think that might have been like one of the very first bass method. My very first bass teacher was really into those. It was like those books from the 70s, right? Those Barry Green. Yeah, they're great books. I mean, he wrote them when he was young too.
But it works so beautifully with the Vance method. And it's just the way, at least the version that I have, everything is sort of parallel, but it's not, you can bypass the nursery rhymes a little bit, or you can just sort of introduce the nursery rhymes, the shortening bread and twinkle, and you can say, well, this is what you need to know in order to do this. And there's all the duets in the popular bass method. And so I try to supplement that fun stuff and get them up to speed that way. And then I just, as quickly as I can, I move them on so that they feel stronger. And then sometimes I just let it go and say, I've introduced the concept and I'm going to reinforce it over time. I learned that the hard way. I've lost a couple of students who got a little frustrated with how slow I was going.
Yeah. I that pacing thing is so, like, those 7 years of being a high school teacher, I think helped me a lot with pacing, because I think before that I was just sort of assumed everybody was into bass as much as I was, and then I think I sort of realized, oh no, they're not. This is one of like 10 activities that they do, and like, can I capture their interest and not make this like a dark hour on their schedule that they dread? Right.
Have to make it fun or there's no point.
Right, exactly. How did you meet Philip Cerna? That through the early music scene, or when did you two first meet?
Well, so I met Philip at the Viola da Gamba Society of America conclave, which I went to. It must have been my son was born in 2006. So I went then, and I think there was something going on. There was a thing called the Consort Cooperative, and so all young professional viola da gamba players would go, and we would choose our own music and coach each other, and it was basically like a little chamber music camp on the side of the Viola da Gamba conclave, where people go to take classes and to study with people and just generally hang out. My husband calls it the coven.
Nice. Yeah, I met Philip. Let's see. He actually went to the San Francisco Conservatory, and then came to Chicago, like late 90s, I think. So we were at Northwestern together, and it was fun. I don't remember when he got into early music, if it was before that, or it definitely, his interest grew a lot in Chicago, and has created an interesting career for himself doing that. And
yeah, he really has.
Yeah. Yeah. He's got a lot of energy. It's amazing.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the things that he and I have connected on is that he likes to teach. He has that program called Viols in Our School.
Yeah.
And he's had, I believe, the same grant that I've had from the Gamba Society, which is what's called a consort loan grant. And they will give a consort of viols, 5 viols, to a teacher who wants to start a program teaching kids, any kids. So he teaches high school kids.
Yeah.
I have a consort of treble viols, and I teach little kids, like in the same way that I would teach Suzuki or Vance bass.
Wow.
I use the same principles. And that's fun.
What do you, because I've seen his program in action. Actually, the high school that if this is what he got the grant for, he goes into a high school that it was like the next high school down the road from the one I was teaching at. Oh. And so I would go over there every once in a while and check it out. And yeah, it was wild to see like the regular high school orchestra program, and then in this other room they're like, they're playing early music, and it's really cool. And the kids really, it was cool to them in a unique way. I mean, there's something just really, they really are into doing that there at that school, Stevenson High School. Like what age are you working with?
Well, right now I have 2 viol players. One is 6, and I believe the other one is 7. I don't think he's turned 8 yet. And I work with them together and I work with them separately. And the idea is, the way I presented it is that when you play viola da gamba, it's a little bit the way people use the recorder as a sort of gateway instrument for winds. In the 3rd grade, all the kids play the recorder. Now, viol's a little bit different, but it is that early instrument, and it's got the frets that help you find where the notes are. That's not the purpose of them, but it does help kids to get oriented on a string instrument. It's not that you can't. Obviously, people play Suzuki violin from a very young age, but gamba is not something that you would necessarily go to. And a treble viol on a 6-year-old kind of feels like the equivalent of a cello. It's that big on them. So you have to learn to work with them in that way. And it's just fun to hear them play music on any instrument, and now they know what it is. And my 7-year-old came into his lesson a couple of weeks ago, and he saw my double bass was standing in the corner. And he said, "That is the biggest viol I've ever seen." And I said, "You figured it out." That's where we're going with this.
Oh, that's great. Wow. Now, what are you playing? What are you having them play? Are you teaching them stuff by rote, or are you having them work out of something, or
I've done some experiments with it. There's a colleague of mine in New York, John Mark Rosendahl. You may know him because he was in Chicago.
Yeah.
He has developed a thing called the Viola da Gamba Dojo, which he uses in New York with his adult and with younger students. And they get together and they play beautiful Renaissance music by rote. He's done some great arrangements. I've used that. I find that I need to do a little more technical introduction. So I've also used a method by Julie Elhard, who's another viola da gamba player who works with young children. And she introduces things a little more systematically for the very, very beginning child. So I do both of those things. I find that the dojo method works a little better for my college students who are beginning. They have a really good time with that. But all of them start to improvise an ornament pretty quickly.
That is so cool. I love that you're doing that at the college level too. Like who picks up the viol in college in your experience? Is it bass players, other string players?
The students that I have that are in college are at Temple University Early Music Ensemble.
Okay.
And most of the ones that they come to me the first day and I talk to them about what do they want to do, what have they done, and what do they want to do. Most of them have played a string instrument before. Very rarely do I get someone who's never played a string instrument and they want to play viol. I would have to be careful about that with that group because I have to have them matching, but I think it would work.
Yeah.
It just depends on the person.
Right. So, but it's mostly string players, though, you're finding that are doing that. Okay.
Mostly string players. Yeah. Sometimes double bass players, but really, I had a violin player come this semester, and that was tough because with the viol, you have to hold your hand square like you would with a double bass, but the violinists, they want to turn their hands sideways all the time. It's pretty funny. Just keep straightening it out.
What's something like I've done so little early music, like a shamefully little amount of early music playing, but like what are some of the things that people find surprising when they like move into that world from maybe they're a violinist and all of a sudden they're playing a viol, or they're a bassist and they're playing a viol? Is it like bowing that's the biggest shift, or what do you find?
That's a really good question. With the viol, they tend to, it's bow angles, and once they get that, they're fine. They can find their way around the instrument. The fact that the strings are flatter, it's really easy to hit extra strings, and you've got at least two more of them than you had before. With the upper strings that I have in my ensemble, and also to an extent the lower strings, I find that they are taught to play Baroque music at the tip because they want to get a lighter sound. They're really trying to imitate what comes with a Baroque bow. And that is not as successful as I think they would like it to be. So when they come to me playing that way, I usually say to them, so we're playing some Handel, a trio sonata, and I say, please, what concerto are you working on right now? And someone would say, oh, I'm working on Bruch. And I say, can you please play this like you would play Bruch with your real sound? And then they start to play, and we can work from there. Because if you don't have a Baroque bow, you can still learn the process of figuring out how to work out phrasing in Baroque music. It's not that you're playing at the tip of the bow. It's nice if you have a Baroque bow, you don't have any camber, and your down bows are much stronger than your up bows. But any good modern player can learn to take the weight out on their modern bow if they know what they're looking for. But if you're just out at the tip, you're not going to get the strength that you want in your sound.
I remember like back in Northwestern, Michael Ovnanian, one of the Chicago Symphony bass players, was teaching there at the time, and he brought in, I don't remember if it was Jerry Fuller, I don't remember who it was, but he brought somebody in, and they were just demonstrating playing different bow strokes on the gut string setup with a Baroque bow, and I was just amazed at how much more. I just always thought of the approach. It was so much more like into the string and like kind of like, I don't know, forceful is the right word, but I mean, I could almost like see the rosin chunks flying as they were playing. It was like a much more sort of earthy approach than I was expecting. I guess my perceptions were off.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's the fun of it, I think. It's very tactile.
Yeah, that's a good word. I like that.
It feels like banging pots and pans to me a little bit. I like having that slack in the string when you go to play that you don't get with steel strings. I really enjoy that. And then you control it like you do with a viola da gamba. You just have more, you use your fingers more. You can feel what you're doing. How
did you get into this early music world? When did that happen for you?
Well, do you want the long story or the medium story?
you could pick. I have plenty of time, so.
Okay. Well, I'll try to be concise. The seeds of it really went back to when I was at Curtis. I studied at Curtis in the early 90s, and that was amazing, and everything about it was amazing. But the things I liked the best were some chamber orchestras that we played in, and I had a professor that used to lead chamber orchestras that would ask us to do, he introduced me to the term performance practice, and he used to ask us to do things like play Vivaldi without vibrato, and use portamento in places where we were taught not to use portamento, sometimes in early romantic music, but sometimes in other things as well. And I had the same professor for music history and for ear training, and he would have us listen to recordings of Furtwängler and things like that, and just listen to what people did in the early 20th century and make connections to what might have been happening before that. And then I forgot about it. Those were such joyous times, and I completely forgot about it after I graduated. And then about a year after that, I was asked to sub by a former teacher of mine for a job that she had, and I showed up with my modern bass and my steel strings, and everybody else, literally everybody else in that orchestra was playing on a period instrument, and I had no idea. They were playing Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, and we don't come in for a little while. We sit there and wait, and within the first 4 bars, I almost fell on the floor, and by the time we got to the break in the first rehearsal, I was begging my stand partner, who turned out to be Joelle Morton, to tell me what could I do? How could I do this all the time? And from that point on, I pretty much did anything I could to point myself in that direction. I felt like I had come home. I knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Oh, wow. What were you thinking your future might look like before that Beethoven 6 concert? Like what was in your mind, and then maybe how did it change after you had that experience?
Well, at that time, I was in Hal Robinson's private studio. I had studied with Roger Scott. I was one of his very last students. And then after Curtis, I went into Hal Robinson's private studio, and that was really what turned me on to teaching and enabled me to do all of the early music things that I do, the technique that I got from him. And I was taking auditions for orchestras and starting to do okay. And I was playing with the Virginia Symphony, and that was what I thought I was going to do. And I didn't know that you could do early music for a career. Never did occur to me.
What does a career in early music look like?
It always looks different, and you do something different every day, pretty much every week. Everybody, I don't know anybody that wakes up and goes to the same place every day. Some people like to teach, some people don't, and some people end up doing side things that they do additions, or they do scholarly work. I have a friend that plays in an ensemble with me that is a professor at Temple University and teaches music history. What I do, let's see, I teach in my private studio, and I direct the early music ensemble at Temple University, and every week I have a different, usually an early music job. Sometimes I still play my modern bass. That's fun too. And sometimes I present my own concerts. In fact, a lot of people I know work on, they're administrative in some way. And another thing that I do is I direct, every January, there's this thing called the Amherst Early Music Winter Weekend Workshop. They do a summer festival, but I'm the director of that weekend workshop that happens outside of Philadelphia. So that takes up a certain amount of my time, and it's fun to make that happen. So, that's how I cobble together a career.
I'd love to know, like, what for the Temple job. Maybe we can start with that. Like, what does it look like being the director of an early music ensemble? Like, what are you up there conducting, baton in hand? Are you playing and leading? Like, how does that work?
Well, all of the above.
Okay.
So I don't never know who I'm going to have in the ensemble until pretty much the first day, and really until the second week. I meet with everybody and I find out who they are, and they could be performance majors, they could be education majors. I had somebody who was music technology this semester, and we often get, this is really fun, we get composers. There is one composition professor who requires his students to take the early music ensemble, but he plays it up because he tells them why he wants them to take it. So that they can really understand what they're doing and where it comes from. And they love it. It's the composers that are the most enthusiastic, and I find that really fascinating. So they have all different levels of performance skills and what they want to do. And what depends on what instrument they played before. Some of them have keyboard skills, and they might want to play harpsichord. Some of them play clarinet, so they want to go into recorder. I had a bassoon player who wanted to play dulcian. And so we have this wonderful collection of instruments. So first I get them started on those instruments, and I had to learn how to play recorder. I try to get people to help me with instruments that are less familiar to me. I can do a little continuo playing, and I bring in people to help. And then I try to choose music that's going to work for everybody. So I divide them into ensembles, and I might have some of the more experienced players playing a Baroque ensemble that I coach separately. And then I try to have some Renaissance pieces that will include everybody. Even if we don't have quite the right instrumentation, there's a lot of flexibility in early music, especially in Renaissance music, but also in Baroque, to make things work. So it's a challenge. Yeah,
but a creative challenge, I'm sure. Like I could just see how exciting that unique puzzle that comes in every new batch of students is. I love that the composers are so into it. I get that. I can see why that might be, but that's fascinating.
Well, yeah, it is, and I think there's a real affinity between early music people and new music people because nobody has to do that.
Right.
you do it for the love. You really do.
You do, and there is totally that tie-in with early music and new music. I remember one of my college jobs at Northwestern was working in the listening center. This is back in the 90s also, and so people would come in and I would put the LP or CD into the machine for them, and they'd listen. And I remember like this composition student would come in, and I remember just him grousing about he was having to listen to Brahms. He's like, oh, I can't stand Brahms. Which I thought, really? But he's like, nope, only Baroque or modern. That's all I'm into. And I've seen that many times. Yeah, there is an affinity, or there's a similarity between those two communities. And yeah, maybe that's it. You don't have to be be doing either of those things.
Well, technically, you don't have to be doing any classical
Well, that's
music,
true. That's true.
Sometimes they get into that mindset. I think there's a tremendous amount of joy in exploring music that you haven't been exposed to before, which is a lot of people haven't been exposed to early music, and it's not necessarily all that tonal, and that makes a lot of sense to composers. They're always creating something new, so they can build on it.
Mentioning the Renaissance group and how you have the creativity, or there's more of like just a culture of making things work, right? Maybe a little bit of flexibility of instrumentation or that sort of thing. And something I've noticed with my friends that are in the early music world is and kind of going back to the career thing, which is something I'm always thinking about. They tend to just end up being a little bit more entrepreneurial, if you want to use that word, or like flexible, or creating their own opportunities. Like Philip Cerner, we're talking about, is a great example. He's built all this stuff up in Chicago. Jerry Fuller is another person who's done that. And then you're putting on concerts, you're as well, right? Yeah. So maybe just talk a bit about what that looks like. What sort of concerts are you putting on? What's that experience like?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of background on that. When I was in Ithaca, after I decided to go into early music full time, I went to do a DMA at Cornell, and I met my husband during that time, and we decided to stay there so he could finish his MBA, and he was offered a job in Ithaca. And we had originally intended to move to a city where there was more freelance work for me, but we decided to stay there so that he could go into this venture capital fund that he was going to work for. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And it turned out there was a rather thriving early music ensemble in Ithaca at the time. And the directors were retiring. I played for them, and they were forlorn because nobody was going to take over their ensemble. And when I realized I was going to stay, I said to them, well, do you think I could do this? I didn't know that I could. The group was called NYS Baroque, and I took it over, and I directed that ensemble for 7 years, and I learned so much about how to do that. So when we decided to move back to Philadelphia, I did a lot less of that sort of thing, but I did recently acquire a Viennese double bass, and I have a great desire to play it, and I sometimes am hired to play it by other ensembles, but I want to play chamber music. There's just a really fun repertoire of music, social music. And I think you had John Feeney talking about it on your podcast before. He had so much to say about all of that, and I wanted to play things like that. So I have an ensemble with my friends here in Philadelphia. There's a thriving early music scene here and really great players. And it's also a really good community. Everybody gets along really well. So I said, let's play some concerts. And so now I'm just organizing it and finding stuff to do and finding venues. And we're working on fundraising for our third full season next year. And it's slow going, but I think it's important to do it. Otherwise, I wouldn't play that instrument in the way that I want to play it.
Well, and I love, like, this is like one of the things that I find really exciting, like when I see happening in the music world, like you're creating something that wasn't there before, right? I think that musicians, especially people on maybe that more traditional path, where they're going through and studying, getting ready to take auditions and that sort of thing, they're looking for opportunities that are out there already, right? The Chicago Symphony has an opening, St. Louis has an opening, and we're all competing for the same opening. But it's so exciting to me when people create their own opportunities. They're bringing more music into the world that wasn't there before. It's sort of a roundabout way to ask a question, but I did this. I sat down. It was actually Jerry Fuller's idea. I sat down about a year ago, and I really thought about what I took in college and like what I've used in the 20 years since I've been in college, right? In terms of just like skills that I learned. And it's hilarious to look at my transcript, and it's like, oh, I took this writing class. Well, I've done a lot of writing and a few other things that I didn't think. And then I thought, like, in terms of musically, like, what did I really not do a lot of in school that I ended up doing a ton of? Well, like conducting, right? Picking repertoire. I've done a lot of that. And then all those sort of administrative tasks, like so many people find themselves in that role. And, you went to Curtis. So it's like, we're talking about like the best music school in the United States by many accounts, right? But so maybe it's not a fair thing to look at Curtis in this way, but like, so here's my roundabout question. So if looking back and like kind of looking at what you've done now, like what do you wish, maybe we don't even use Curtis, but what do you wish schools offered more of to like train people for what a music career might look like? I
could actually use Curtis as an example because I see them doing it. We're starting to do it even more when I was there. If you don't mind me going in that direction.
No, please. Yeah.
I guess my last year there, they started, or maybe it was the year before that, but there was a class at that time it was called the 20th Century Musician.
Nice. There we go.
It was the 20th century. But the syllabus covered things that you would need to know and all of these things were things that I used since then. How do you put together a press kit? How do you behave on a freelance job? How do you get freelance work? How do you present your own concert? There's all things like that. And I know that since that time, they have expanded that course and the students are still required to take it. And in addition, there's a really amazing thing happening where they're teaching, Mary Javian is teaching students how to do outreach. And if I could take one more course in my life, it would be that one.
And it's amazing to see what people like Joe Conyers in your area is a good example of like in terms of outreach and how powerful that is and bringing music into the world in such a like way that's obviously affecting people, right? With these young people, or like Barry Green's another example. We were talking about Barry Green here in the Bay Area. Barry built this thriving youth culture of double bass here that I see very clearly here. He started doing it in the 90s. I think he moved back here. And it's just amazing, like what one person can do to like bring music to just in just this like really profound way to people that need it and thrive with it and go out into the world with that as a part of themselves. That's cool. That's great.
It's actually, when you were talking about creating your own performances, it's something that I think about a lot, and I haven't entirely figured out how to address it. Because I can present concerts of classical chamber music because I want to play that music, but what am I giving to other people through that? What is someone else going to get out of it, and how am I going to connect with them and make it relevant for their lives? I can't just stand up and say, this is a piece by Mozart and he was alive in such and such a time and look at my pretty instrument. that doesn't do any good. I have to find a way to make them feel like they belong in the room.
Right. That is the challenge. So like, what are some examples of like what have you found that seems to work for you, just in terms of making that connection? I mean, that's I love that example you just did. I think that's the way that a lot of concerts have been presented traditionally and still are presented, right? Look, here I am. Yeah. Here's Mozart. Listen to my music and look at this pretty instrument. Like what have you found that has connected for you?
I don't feel I've been terribly successful in my own performances, but I watch other people's. I was just at one last week where I went for some friends and I was managing the door for them. This is what we early music folks do. So I stood at the door of this historic house in Philadelphia, and as people came in, the musicians were upstairs getting ready for the performance, and I welcomed them and I asked for their names, and I sent them into the adjoining room where people were serving refreshments. And I said, you can go have some refreshments or you can go visit the garden and the music will be upstairs. And people came in and felt like they were at a party, and it was a party for them. And then they went upstairs to this little ballroom and they heard a little bit of music, and then someone stood up out of the audience and spoke to them about what music was like in Philadelphia, where they live, in this particular street, in this particular house, while they were hearing this music right after that. And then they were able to make that connection to themselves. And then they heard some more music, and they had some more wine. And it was really, I thought, that's the kind of event that I would feel comfortable at. That's what I'd like to create.
Yeah, I love events like that are making that connection a little. You know, I'm going to go play for the first time in a few weeks in this group here in San Francisco called the Awesome Orchestra, and it's so great. And the section leader is it's the section happiness manager, right? And there's like a lot of beer involved in these concerts. Oh yeah, and they're like outdoors. Usually sometimes they're at a brewery, and it's just. And I haven't gone yet, but I heard about this orchestra before I moved to town, and so I'm excited to check that out. And you know what else? Like, it's so hard for me to stay up past 10 p.m. I'm becoming such an old man, but so it's hard for me to like go out to rock shows and stuff like that. But when I do, it's fun for me to like get out of the whole classical music world and just see like how other musicians connect with their audience, right? Like sometimes I go to a rock show and I'm like, wow, this is like exactly, just to forget about the style of music or whatever, but like the way in which they're talking to the audience, the way the audience is reacting, like that sort of sense of fun and spectacle and event and connection. I learn a lot. I'm probably the only person sitting there analyzing it like that. But I learn a lot when I go to shows like that too.
That is really fun. You know, the Bach Orchestra here, the Bach Collegium in Philadelphia, did something like that a year ago. Every concert had a newly commissioned work, and the final concert it was a singer-songwriter that basically wrote like a little mini oratorio for this Baroque orchestra and chorus. And he was all completely like, there were amplifiers and there were guitars and things like that. And the church, this very formal church, was completely packed, and everybody was having a good time. Yeah, I think it can be brought into places like that. But I think that Awesome Orchestra sounds like a gig anybody would enjoy. Yeah,
I'll let you know. It sounds like a lot of fun for sure.
That's so cool.
Well, I got one more question for you, and I thank you so much for taking the time and chatting. And anytime you got something coming up, let me know. I'd love to get the word out. But and we kind of dug into this a bit with Curtis, but like advice for younger musicians is something everybody wants to hear. And I usually like to just like turn like rather than just ask that. Like I usually frame it. I'll probably edit this out, but I used to just ask like, what would you tell a high school senior going off to music school, knowing what you know now? And usually what I ask it now is like, what would you tell yourself? Because that usually seems to get a better answer. But however you want to look at it, like what?
Oh, that's hard.
I know. I'm sorry. It's like super annoyingly open-ended question, but and I edit, so don't worry. But if you have anything you might offer, like 17-year-old, 18-year-old Heather, like if we rewind back to the early 90s and you're getting ready to go to school, if you have any advice, what might that be?
Well, I think that's probably one of the hardest times in anybody's life, because you just don't know where you're going to end up and what's going to work and what's not. But the things that have gotten me to where I am, and I have to say, I am so happy every single day for what I get to do. Those moments where it's almost electric, where you feel this is right. Like that moment I described about playing Beethoven. There was a moment when I was teaching once where I realized, oh, this is the thing I like to do. Pay attention to those things and do what you can do to make those happen in your life, because that's where your greatest joy is going to come from.
Heather, thank you so much for chatting. It's so great to catch up with you. And folks, check out everything she's up to at her website, heathermillerlardin.com. And if this is your first episode or your 300th episode or anywhere in between, I'd love to have you subscribe to the podcast so that you can get these delivered to you automatically. It's easy to do if you are an Apple person. ContrabassConversations.com/iTunes will take you there. If you are a Windows person, Stitcher, Google Play, there's so many options, as well as our free Contrabass Conversations app. You can find that all at our website, contrabassconversations.com. And I would also love to hear from you. I love hearing from people. I get messages every day from people all across the world. It's such an honor to hear from people who are listening to this in Australia, the Netherlands, South America, Africa, you name it. I've been getting messages. It's always amazing seeing where people listen to these podcasts. So I would love to hear from you. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com will get you to me, and I respond to each and every message. If you're going to the International Society of Bassists Convention, or if you're not, I hope you enjoy next week's ramp up to the 2017 50th Anniversary ISB Convention. We're going to be featuring episodes around the convention, what's going to be happening, how you can best experience the convention, a couple highlights, that kind of thing. So stay tuned for that, and we will see you again very soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.